Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast with Mike and Mike. Sales is a thinking process. This podcast will help you learn about what works in sales, how to hone your skills, and increase your success. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and we have a guest this week that we're so excited about. Joining Mike Simmons and I will be Tiffani Bova. Tiffani is the Global Growth and Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce. Now, Mike, I know this is a guest you were so looking forward to having on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've connected with Tiffani both through LinkedIn and Twitter. I've been following her for a while now, and she's just put some great information out there for everybody to consume. And I thought we'd just kind of start with, what is Global Innovation Evangelist? What does that mean? What do you do, Tiffani?
What a great question. Let's just start at the brass tacks. What do you do every day?
Yeah.
So my focus, I joined about 18 months ago after being a distinguished analyst and research fellow at Gartner for about a decade. And when I joined, I knew that this was going to be an amazing place to come and sort of find new ways in which I could add value to the market. So my focus is really helping companies reimagine how they can not only grow bigger, but grow with innovative business models and technology, and the way that they can transform the way they sell and market to customers, really focused around customer success. The second thing I like to say is I consider myself a recovering sales rep. So I'm always excited to meet sales leaders at some of the largest companies in the world, as well as many really great startups who are using Salesforce technology and other in our portfolio to improve performance and enhance the customer experience. So, every day is just a learning experience for me and just been a lot of fun.
Awesome. And I really like the thought process around reimagine and in the context of innovation. Can you talk a bit about what that means to kind of reimagine what you do, maybe even at an individual sales rep role?
Yeah, I'd say this. Over the last probably 7 or 8 years, I really kind of started to hone in on the fact that I meet with a lot of companies that are challenged with all the disruption that's happening in the market, whether it's at the customer level, at the technical level, government, politics, world, kind of everything coming at them at one time. And I kind of created this bucketing system, if you will, around companies that were trying to optimize what they were doing. And to me, that is, how do we do what we're doing now just better? How do we leverage the resources we have better, the tools at our disposal better, our marketing dollars better, just kind of really optimizing the business. And some companies actually view that optimization as transformation or innovation. And I think there's a big difference between optimizing and that the next sort of bucket I was focusing on, which is taking some of the freed up resources, money, systems, time that you've gained from that optimization and applying it to now actually starting to do things differently and innovate the way you go to market potentially in new channels, in new regions. It could be that you're using new kinds of sales reps, quote unquote. So going through channels or even using automation and bots and things like that. And the third was really where you say, regardless of what I'm gaining, the goodness I'm gaining out of optimizing and kind of transforming, that I really start to completely reimagine the way I do things. I may have always sold through partners or through distribution or through third parties. And now customers are really demanding from me that I have a much more direct relationship with them. So this kind of direct to consumer push we're seeing from a lot of consumer goods companies, that is really innovating the way in which they sell and go to market. And so it has everything to do with focusing on the customer, right? Because the customer is the one that's forcing these companies to innovate and stretch themselves and reimagine, to use that word again, the ways in which they engage with them. So that's kind of the way I do it. You optimize, transform, and then you really get into innovation.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things that came up in that, as you were describing that I'd like to key in on. One of them is diversity in thought and how diversity helps support innovation in an organization. Can you talk to experience there and just thought process in general around diversity, whether it's diversity from the standpoint of experiences, so people who maybe move into sales from a communication background, or diversity as far as gender, diversity as far as life experience? What are your thoughts around diversity and the impact on innovation?
I think I have a lot of thoughts there, but let me start with specifically sort of sales and customer service. So, I always get asked through the career, I've been selling technology or been close to the technology industry now for almost 20 years, if not a little longer. And I was one of the only women early on selling technology into large law firms, which were mostly male at the time. And the board and the operating committees was almost always male. And so I was selling, $1 million deals at the time. And people used to say, well, did you think it gave you benefit or you got an advantage because of that? And just personally, I never felt that I got a promotion or a deal because I was a woman. And then I never felt like I didn't get one because I was a woman. I never experienced that. I know some women have. I haven't. Maybe I'm just completely naive and blind to it. I don't know. But the good news is I don't feel like I've experienced it. So that's a positive. Yep. I think that diversity to teams is really, really important because you get different points of view. I think what's interesting now is the diversity of teams is not only a human component, that you've got machine learning, AI, and things that are now diversifying what a sales team looks like or a customer service team looks like. So the dynamics between human and machine is a diversity as well. And the impact of those to the way and the cohesiveness of a team is kind of yet to be seen because I think people are still trying to, once again, on the sales and customer service side, find their way through how you start to organize these. On the customer service side, there was an interesting story that a gentleman was working with a female colleague and they shared an email box. And depending on who answered, it would put the signature file of either, the gentleman or the woman. Okay. And a woman was having she wasn't sort of getting through to this particular customer. And he happened to answer in her SIG file. And the response came back kind of very short and very abrupt. And so when he responded the next time, he sort of just repeated himself, but he signed as himself and he didn't really notice and he got a completely different answer. So he said, you know what, I'm going to sort of do a little study. So for 2 weeks, he completely answered in her SIG file and she answered in his SIG file. And he wrote a story up on Medium about it. And it was really fascinating for him to see the difference in response rates and sort of even the tone of response between the two. And the only difference was the signature file, right? And who it was specifically coming from. So really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll get a link to that and include that in the show notes of the podcast. You go through these periods of saying is the more things change, the more things remain the same. And when we think about sales, we think of some of the traditional foundational skills, starting with the customer, listening to understand, to gather information. Or one of our guiding principles is put the solution in the context of what's important to the customer. You've got a quote that you have on your Twitter profile. How you sell matters, what your process is matters, but how your customers feel when they engage with you matters more. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I think I always hone in on this one thing is that, as salespeople, we have very little in our control. And we don't, if you work for a company, especially a large company, right, they choose what territory you sell into or what vertical you sell into or what region or what size company. They will make decisions around, how you position it, the value prop, the pricing model. They will then control in many ways what tools you use, right? We use Salesforce. They will then say, here's our policy around social media selling or social selling and LinkedIn and Twitter and Pinterest. They give you a lot of guardrails to keep you sort of in the brand's tone of voice. And so the only thing that sales reps can really control is their behavior in front of a customer. That's almost the only thing we can control. So how we make a customer feel in that moment of truth when you're in front of them, either face-to-face or on the phone or via email, how you make them feel in that engagement has a lot to do with the long-term relationship you're trying to build with that customer. If they feel like you always have their best interest in mind, that you're listening, that you're feeling their pain, that you are really about their success and not retiring quota. And whether at the underlying, you're about retiring quota, obviously. I mean, salespeople we're very simple folk, right? It's like ready to close some business. But at the end of the day, that's a given. They know that you are there trying to sell something. You don't need to lead with that. So how you make customers feel, even when you're not in the room, and if someone in your customer's organization says, I think that sales rep is trying to do this or that with us, you want your customer to almost defend you and say, yeah, that's not the relationship or the experience I've had with Tiffani or Bob or Sally, whomever it might be. So I think it's really important for salespeople to remember that through all the noise, we have to show up with our best self. And I know that sort of sounds very airy-fairy, but at the end of the day, it's really the only thing we leave behind.
Yeah, and you have to do it because so many sales professionals, especially those early in career, they just want to rush to a proposal. They want to deliver the quote. The customer's asking for the number, so they just dive right into that. And they haven't taken the time to really understand what's truly important to the customer. Why is the customer doing what they're doing? What problem are they really trying to solve? Does your solution actually fit? And can it address the challenge? And they rush through the process because hey, the customer asked for a price, or they feel like the more proposals I get out there, the more business I'm going to bring in. And I can tell you, for me, I've always been more successful when I've slowed the process down. And I've slowed the process down in the context of what's important to the customer, not making it about me or about our process, but more about where they are, what they're trying to do. And then as they go through that and they have that experience, they become an advocate for us inside their organization. And they also become an advocate for us outside of their organization. So awesome.
And I'd say this, that I think, also something else I say quite often is that your greatest sales force is your customers advocating on your behalf. And so when you show up with the right attitude and the exchange between the two of you is very value-based, you want them advocating on your behalf, both for you individually, for your product, for your brand, regardless of where they are today, because you never know. Even today, I get emails or LinkedIn or Twitter, or just yesterday, I had written an article in HuffPost last week, and the company that I had interviewed for this article had sent out a newsletter to everyone, like in their mailing list, to say, hey, we've got this great article that was written about some work we'd done. And I get this email from a past COO of mine from 2000. And he's like, hey, Tiff, I haven't talked to you in a long time. Seems like things are going really great. Glad to hear things are going well. Like, what can we do together? And so you go back, that's 17 years ago, right? And he remembered me, thought enough to go hunt me down, right? Find my email, send me a note. And that's what I mean by the relationships and the bridges you build and the things that you do, advocating on your behalf is just a big part of success, both career-wise, regardless of whether you're in sales or not.
It's a life skill, right? I mean, you build a relationship with the people you work with that you want to be around. You build this relationship of trust. It's so easy to have that trust fail or fall apart. And it takes a lot of time to build that rapport and trust and dependability as you go through things. One of the other thoughts that kind of comes to mind as we're talking through this is that, again, that innovation at the individual sales rep level. So there are some really cool technology that are out there, some really neat tools that help you get access to personality data on potential contacts. They help you sift through information and get trigger alerts on when a company's talking about something. When you think of technology, what are some of the things that you're excited about that are coming over the course of the next couple of years that you think are really going to impact the sales profession and helping salespeople better connect those dots between the customer and the challenges that they're running into?
Yeah. When I hear the market say AI or machine learning or automation is just going to flat out replace sales reps, it's always one of those things that kind of sends me into a tailspin because I do think that there are many tasks that sales reps do on a daily basis that are very time consuming and monotonous and consistent, which could be automated. And if sales lets them be automated, it can free up some time for them. Not everything, but some things like logging a call or logging a meeting. If the system knows that you've booked a meeting and you went on that meeting and you closed the meeting, it should then log it as, Tiffani met with Bill. Here were the things that were outlined in the meeting, and these things probably transcribe. And I could go in and edit if needed, but the interaction was already logged. Whereas before it used to be, we had to log everything. We had to look, if you even had something to log it into. I've been selling long enough that it used to be kind of Post-it notes and Excel spreadsheets back in WordPerfect days. And I'm really trying to date myself, right?
Uh-oh.
Yeah. But those were the days,
Yeah.
where
what you see is what you get.
Yeah. You'd spin through the Rolodex and whatever it landed on, that's who you called. It was like those days, right? And then I graduated to a single user version of ACT. And then, so I've graduated up. But if you think about that automation, that's goodness. And salespeople should not be afraid of that. And I think we've come a long way, and I think they understand, and we all understand that there's goodness there. And they feel like, look, if I can not do those things anymore, fantastic. Because sales reps don't wake up every day and go, I can't wait to data enter. Probably not top of their list. Okay. But the next thing would be, okay, I used to say, or my manager used to say, call 100 people, Tiffani, every single day, because that was the way and that was the method. And now I think that it isn't about calling the 100 people. It's about, I want to call the 20 best prospects today. And in my gut as a seller, which we tend to run from our gut, I might be able to, in my head, identify who those 20 are. And maybe I'm a little directionally correct. But if I would trust the fact that now AI is starting to learn from the systems and the machine is learning, the machine doesn't learn like a child, where a child doesn't have access to all the other children at their age around them that they can learn from. They only can learn kind of in a one-on-one environment. The machine actually can learn from lots of sales reps simultaneously. And it could be even cross-industry or cross-company, where it starts to advise and tell you who are the best 20 to call. And it's constantly learning and adjusting. And as a sales rep, you start to trust that. Now, all of a sudden, you don't have to call the 100 people. Now, I think we're not there yet. I think many still run on gut and they think it's an art, not a science. And I think the balance between the two is what's super exciting. But that's only possible if sales management starts to loosen the expectations around productivity and saying you don't have to call the 100 people. I'm actually, as a manager, going to trust the system to say these are the 20 you should call. So a ground up swell in this particular example will not work. If sales says, nope, I'm only going to call 20 because the system is telling me and I'm trusting it and I'm using all the benefit the technology is bringing me today through Salesforce or others. And my manager says, wait a second, Tiffani, you're not calling 100 people. And I keep getting in trouble, if you will, because I'm not calling the 100. That is where the gating factor is to sales really adopting, is management has to change the metrics and productivity metrics that we've had for decades. So I'd say that's exciting to me, but I'm also concerned that management isn't moving fast enough.
Yeah, and you've hit something that's near and dear, another topic that's near and dear to my heart. It's the metrics that you look at. I mean, I can go in and say that I went to the gym 365 days out of the year, but that doesn't mean I actually worked out. That doesn't mean that I didn't sit there and drink coffee or shoot the breeze with somebody inside the gym. All that 100 dials tells me is that the phone rang 100 times. Those meaningful conversations are what make an impact on our success as sales professionals and our team's success when we're leading them. When I think of the technology, that one of the things that gets me excited is this whole idea of being able to help the customer move through that first 80 to 90 yards on the field, and then being there as a guiding light to help them manage the next 10 to 15 yards where things start to get ugly, where you can provide insights to them about whatever challenges may be in front of them. You can provide insights to them about other decisions, how others go through this process. You can help them navigate some of the internal things that happen inside their organization. So we're very excited about the data, but as excited as we are about the data, it turns into all of a sudden somebody saying, well, okay, now I know that 100 dials leads to 10 meetings, leads to one demo, leads to, I've got to do that 40 times over in order to get to 3 proposals. That's, I think, the danger in the number. So really interesting perspective.
Tiffani, something that you said earlier in this interview about somebody from your past reaching out after they read your article, and it was based on a good relationship you had built in the past. I'm just wondering, in, let's say, July of 2002, were you doing things in mind knowing this is going to help me out in July of 2017? Do you think that far ahead when you are building these relationships?
When you start to have relationships early in your career and you have some kind of understanding of the impact that a good relationship with a customer has during a sales cycle, I think what becomes natural to you is that's what you start to double click on. And so I also like to say that knowing your strengths as an individual sales rep, if you will, I happen to be good at building relationships. I'm good at follow-up. I've always naturally sort of had the customer in mind, knowing at the back of my head, right, I needed to close quota. But I knew instinctively, I think, that if I did right by them, if I didn't get the deal right away, it might come later. It might come when they're at another job. It might come 5 or 10 years later, because I always knew I was going to stay sort of close to sales. And so the relationships that I've been able to build over the course of my professional career, I feel has served me well. And I think if you're early in your sales career and you don't yet understand this, this is a huge competitive advantage for you as you start to move up and have influence on getting into accounts that maybe you've been precluded to get into in your previous role, or one of your sales reps is unable to get in. And then you go do some research and you realize someone you worked with 5 or 10 years ago happens to work there, and you reach out. And if they had a great experience with you, even if they're not the decision maker, they may be that entry point in order to get you into the decision maker. And their reference, their introduction is just what you needed. And if you don't think that you have long-term implications and decisions that you make today in things that you do with customers, both good and bad, you're missing the subtlety of why some sales reps have great reputations and then sales sometimes gets really bad reputation. And I think the difference between the two lies in this topic.
Yeah, it's that whole idea of, are you focused on the customer or are you focused on yourself? Are you trying to make your problems the customer's problems, which are, hey, I've got to hit a number, or it's end of the month, or it's whatever, I've got to go through these metrics that I need to deliver on to management? Or are you more focused on where the customer is?
Yeah, I'd say this, I would be absolutely not telling the truth if I sat here and said, I have not said to a customer, I'm trying to close my quarter.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Right. Yep.
But I would not say that in my first meeting. Hey,
Yes.
Nice to meet you. I'm really only here to close my quarter. Probably wouldn't go over well. But if I've established a relationship with them and I say, look, I know I'm pushing a little hard. We're at the end of the quarter. It would really, really help me out if we could get it across the line for this quarter. If you've established and sort of built the trust between you and that customer, they're not going to be offended by that comment. They're going to laugh and say, listen, I'm here for you. I get it. Anything I could do to help you get across the line. Can't guarantee anything, but I appreciate you being honest, or whatever it might be. But you can't sort of show up with that in hand or even behave that way until you've kind of earned the right to have that kind of conversation with whoever's sitting on the other side of the table with you. And it's definitely not for a wide audience, right? If you're trying to navigate 5 or 10 different buyers in the buying journey or in the deal, you better have honed into who the person is that is your champion and your advocate. That's the person you have that conversation with, and let them do it for you internally. There are times where you just got to flat out say, look, I'm trying to hit my number.
Yeah, absolutely. And the personal story on that end, I left an organization back in 2000, and I let a couple of clients who had active sales cycles go, let them know that I was in the process of leaving, that I was going to be giving my 2-week notice, and did that beforehand to get those deals through. And they knew I had built up a level of trust with each of these people over the course of a 7-year period in some of those instances. So I had earned that right to be able to have that kind of conversation rather than just dumping something onto somebody and saying, hey, help me with my problem. So know that in every interaction that you are constantly trading, you're constantly building rapport, you're constantly building that capability to have those kind of conversations. And whether it's about asking for help at the end of a quarter or even asking for a referral and a connection to somebody into another area of the organization. So Tiffani, this has been a great discussion. Really enjoy the time. Another thing that you've talked about, and just kind of as we look to wrap this up, is this idea of what some of the best brands will do as we go forward here over the next couple of years and start using some of the tools that are out there. Are there any nuggets that you'd like to leave for the team? And we've got a combination of founders inside startups who listen to the podcast. We've got early stage sales reps who listen to the podcast. And we've got people who have no background in sales, but have kind of found it interesting and are starting to think about how it applies to their role.
Sure. So I'd say for the founders, get really good at selling. Sometimes we get very enamored by whatever product or service it is that we're launching, but more and more customers are viewing the product as the experience that they have with the brand. And is their life richer because of using your product? If you're in the consumer business, if you're in the B2B business, are they growing better and working with their customers more efficiently and effectively and having greater returns by working with your technology? Like, always make sure that it is about what the customer experience is with your product, not about how do you sort of push your product out to market. And I think that that is something that founders that are very successful have found that they need to be better at selling and better at marketing early in their life of the company. And as it gets more mature, the biggest question and the biggest challenge they face is, when do I hire my first sales rep and what kind of sales rep do I need to get? Maybe I can just market. Do I hire technical sales reps? Do I hire face-to-face sales reps? Do I do the call center route? What's the best thing for me to do? And it's really one of the hardest questions for founders that are moving into, okay, I now need to start to not be the salesperson and the marketer and the technical lead, and the CEO, that I need some help. So from a founder's perspective, get good at selling. And you don't have to be a pro. You just need to understand what it means to show up and add value. And these podcasts and others are a great way for you to find those skills and spend time on developing it. You don't have to be great at it. Always be great at what you are great at, but you need to be good enough that you get customers interested in whatever it is you're selling. If you're a salesperson and you're looking to advance your career, I always say, invest in yourself. If you're not investing in yourself, nobody else is. So things like this podcast, read books, go to seminars, find people who you think has done a really good job positioning themselves as a strong seller, and what are the things that they do that you may be able to make your own. I never advise sellers to go and try to copy or replicate what others do. Do it with your own personality and your own flair, and the things that you're good at, you want to absolutely capitalize on and get better at. And the things you're not good at, leave for other people. If you're just not good at cold calling, then don't ever take a job for cold calling on selling. Work for a company that has sales development reps that do the cold calling for you and pass you a warm lead. Really understand what you're good at and then position yourself for the greatest personal success, but continue to invest in yourself. I'd say the third thing is, regardless of where you are in your career or what role you play, getting much more comfortable of the usage of technology, especially in the role of selling. Video selling is super important now. You've got multiple channels in which people are communicating, whether it's messenger, whether it's chat, whether it's SMS texting, whether it's email or phone. And so the challenge we have is that there's so many different mediums for us as salespeople to reach out, that you just have to make sure you're very conscious of what you put out and what you put forward, because it will, as we were just discussing, it will follow you forever. So, making sure that you always put your best foot forward. Those would be sort of the 2 or 3 things, minus the things that I've already said in the podcast. But for founders out there, I can't stress enough, especially in my past life at Gartner, how many I spoke with. And really, they were very much struggling with this whole, how do I transition from being a product-led, technology-led company to being a more customer sales-led company.
Yeah, awesome. And the thing the overarching theme across each of those pieces that you addressed is how important it is to be talking to customers. When you're in your own bubble, inside your own organization, and you're talking about product market fit in the context of your ideal customer, those conversations are completely different than when you're in front of your actual customer, when you're having a discussion with the people who are actually using the product, with the people who are making the buy decision, with the people who are trying to drive the organization forward. Have conversations with people. It's amazing the amount of information they'll share with you if you ask good questions and you start from the right intention.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Awesome. Well, Tiffani, this has been great. Thank you for joining us. I think we could have a conversation for a couple of hours here. Just so interesting to kind of hear the background and hear your perspective, and really appreciate the time.
Of course. Well, thank you for having me.
Tiffani, Mike had promised me this was going to be an outstanding interview, and it certainly was. And I'm interested in finding out more, and I know others will be. Where can we find out more about you and what you're up to?
Well, you can always follow me on Twitter. I'm pretty prolific there. So it's Tiffani with an I at the end _Bova on Twitter. I blog at HuffPost and Harvard Business Review. And I've got a podcast called What's Next, all about growth, innovation, and sales that kind of looks around the corner and talks to some great thinkers about what they see as well. So, it's like friends having a conversation. So you can find me in any of those locations.
All right. Thank you so much, Tiffani. And thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.